So, welcome everyone. I'm very, very excited to host Tim, one of our very early supporters and ambassadors, tonight again. Like last time, we hosted him already last year. We learned about a lot about his journey as an entrepreneur, becoming an investor, what his personal mission is. And tonight, it will be quite a different topic and way more a deep dive into climate tech and venture capital. I'm very much looking forward to that. And we will kick it off again with a short masterclass, fireside chat between Tim and myself, and then we will have time for questions. Therefore, I would love to see a lot of questions popping up in the chat during our conversation because we will tackle it afterwards. And Tim, I would love to start very basic and really bring everyone up to speed. What is climate tech literally, and how do you define it?
Yeah. Hey, first of all, thanks for having me again, and happy to support and talk about this. So, climate tech. First of all, I would say there are two buckets. Is all technologies that are either aimed at mitigating or adapting to climate change. And this is very different because adapting means we're saying, well, will happen. We need to deal with it. So things like flood protection, insurance, topics, anything which deals with a warming world. And while it seems that this is important, what we see as climate tech, and what actually also most of the climate funds view as climate tech, is it's just mitigation. So we're trying to prevent climate change. We're trying to not cure the symptoms, but the actual root cause. And then it's very broad. Then it includes innovation in all kinds of areas. It starts with renewable energy, energy storage, carbon capture and sequestration, sustainable transportation, agricultural practices, food, agriculture, land use, and anything designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, very broadly.
And Tim, from your perspective, I mean, you started as an entrepreneur in very much advertising, then you switched to climate tech. Why does it matter so much, and why is at the moment the right time to really also invest in it so strongly, as an entrepreneur, as an investor?
I mean, there's the personal view, and it's something I've always cared very deeply about ecological matters, and every phase. Also, when you care about ecological matters, every phase, every decade has its issues. So, for example, there was a time way before I was born, when we dealt with the forests. So the acid rain was a big topic, which was solved because it was we changed the way cars were fueled. Then some of you might remember, and that was in my childhood, the ozone layer depletion, which we actually solved because we changed the way on how we do certain things of cooling and other things. But those were singular, isolar problems. And now the big ecological issue of our times is climate. And so I think, first of all, I think it matters to us as humanity, because we want to preserve a livable planet. But also, I think, and that's kind of where the move is also towards the business side, is decarbonizing the economy is also actually a thing to foster sustainable economic growth. It's really, if you think about it, a lot of the practices we have are just very inefficient. So take fossil fuels. In some foreign country, we dig holes, we take oil out there, we carry it across the globe. Actually, half of our transportation on the seas of the world is fossil fuels, and then we burn it somewhere in. It's like an utterly inefficient process. If the sun is coming right here and it's shining, and if we install a solar panel, it works for the next 50 years. Of course, it degrades over time, but it works. And so a lot of the things are very, very inefficient. And so by reducing our dependency on fossil fuel, it's also we reduce our dependency on very often dictators and other bad economies. We also, besides limiting global warming, we reduce the local air pollution, we protect biodiversity, and just generally foster a very resilient global economy. So it's all of that is intertwined, but it's just it makes just a lot of sense economically as well as ecologically, and that's why I'm so eager also to transform the economy.
I exactly wanted to hear that, right? Because it's in the end, it's the win-win that some critics don't really see and put the emphasis on. But I think it's really the from a from that perspective, it only makes sense. And I love that example here of fossil fuel and like solar panels. And Tim, looking a little bit, I think you can only really build great solutions in the future when you understand a little bit the history on what already happened. And when you reflect a little bit on, the history of climate tech, like how did it develop over the last, the last decades, last years? What are the things you observed and you love to also, take into consideration when you evaluate, solutions, pitches that you receive?
Yeah, sure. I mean, first of all, I have to say there are people who have been in climate space longer
Yeah.
than I am. I've been investing in climate tech about for 10 years now, which is longer than most, but still there are some veterans who've seen things in the very early waves. And very initially, I think the climate space focused primarily on renewable energy sources like wind and solar and developing this. And there are some great pioneers in this field. In Germany, for example, I can think of Matthias Willenbacher as a great example. You should interview him on this because he's been a pioneer building up a pioneering company in the early wind space. And so there have been solar pioneers and others who've been in the space. And I think over the years, and that's what we're seeing, especially in the past 3-4 years, it really has expanded to include a very wide-ranging technologies. What I said earlier, including transportation, agriculture, manufacturing, and all of that has spurred a lot of technological advancements, also decreasing costs. We've seen some of the early technologies, solar as a prime example, or storage. Costs go down every year dramatically, but then also the increased awareness of the urgency with policies driving it, and that's a recent thing. But again, I think we've been seeing it much more holistically in the last few years. And also for me, that was my aha moment came, and that was part of the founding of World Fund, is when Christian Koll, the founder of Ecosia, gave me the book Project Drawdown, which I always recommend, because it was like, okay, wow, this is very broad. Climate change, or the carbon economy, I have to say it that way. The carbon economy just is everywhere. So we emit carbon in every part of our life. So naturally, we have to tackle every part of our life. And it's a bit like digitalization when we're thinking, okay, where's digital in our life? Well, it's everywhere. It's from whatever we do, we touch digital stand, and it's the same thing here. It's whatever we do in our lives, we can't escape it. We are producing more or less emissions. So, which means also it needs systemic change. And I think that has sunk in as a realization also just recently, that it's not just about a renewable energy grid, but it's like just an encompassing change of everything on how humanity lives on Earth.
And I also love what you just mentioned, right? With that, like in everything we do, there's an impact on the climate, right? And I think every time an industry develops, I think you always start with like one of the bigger things, and then step by step you look into all areas.
Yes.
I think I'm very much into education, therefore you also see the strong development there. And one point in time, that it got bigger and bigger, and a lot of different challenges and problems were tackled. Moving a little bit from the history to the here and now, Tim, and what are, when you reflect a little bit, what are right now the biggest trends in climate tech that you see?
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, it's a broad field, but let me give you a few examples. I mean, one is certainly the electrification of transport. So the shift towards electric vehicles, the entire charging infrastructure, and all the providers and utilities which are across the way. And that is coupled very much with the renewable of renewables, the expansion of renewables itself. So continued growth in solar, wind, and battery storage, but then particularly an intelligent link between the two. Because I mean, one of the problems of renewable is that the sun shines a bit intermittently. The wind also not always just blows when exactly we need the power. But transportation, for example, has the big plus of having huge batteries, and we don't need to power our car exactly in the sometimes we have, but most of the times we're pretty flexible on when we power the car. And everybody who has a solar station and also has an electric car will know this. Like, for example, just very practically speaking, I of course power my car when the sun shines, but what we don't have is a system that actually supports that. At the moment it's more like goodwill of individual people, but we need to come to a real system which is integrated, which has all those decentralized energy sources, which takes the price of electricity but also the carbon footprint, that of course coupled with the price, into account. So all of that is really interlinked, and that's a huge area. And we see so many super innovative startups doing little bits and pieces there, but the combined intelligence of this system can be so huge that it's just the better, more resilient, massively cheaper, and of course emission free system we're building here, if we just continue on that path for the next 10 years and don't stop somewhere in between. Yeah, so that's one area. I'll give two other one. Then there's the whole area of green hydrogen is obviously a big one for all the things which cannot be electrified. High temperature is an area. Also in long distance transportation is an interesting area which cannot be decarbonized that easily with electric means. So transatlantic flights, transatlantic shipping, those sorts of things. Those are, and again, also linked is with the question, how do you produce green hydrogen, at what times? All of that is kind of linked together. And so this is, I would say, this is all on the, particularly on the energy side, transportation, housing, all of that is very much linked. But then let me quickly touch on two other areas which also get a lot of interest and which are interesting areas. One is carbon capture and storage. So technologies to capture and store CO2 emissions, either from industrial sources or directly from the air, or also through some natural means. And generally, two important points here. So first of all, I think carbon capture and storage can by no means be a substitute for reducing CO2 emissions. That needs to be super clear, because very often it's used, especially by politicians, to bring in this, oh, we're going to have those magic machines that they're going to solve everything. We don't need to do anything else. That is plain wrong. So that's the first thing. But if we abstract away from this and are like, okay, everything in life has diminishing returns. So it's going to be harder and harder to decarbonize. The first part is easier, and then it gets harder. So for example, long distance shipping is going to be harder than short distance shipping, and so on and so forth. And there are some areas, I don't know, sending rockets to space, that's going to be very hard to decarbonize and very costly. Then we really shouldn't do it if we have this machine who, in other cases, sucks out CO2 from the air, or this natural processes, biochar, those sorts of things. And then it makes sense, and we need to bring the cost of those things down. We need to make them economically and ecologically viable. And so it is an area which rightly gets research, gets funding. We funded one ourselves, one called Mission Zero. But again, it never must be a substitute to real reduction, but it has its place in the decarbonization ecosystem.
Great examples and huge areas, I think, where we need many, many solutions for. Tim, I think we lost you a little bit. So we are trying to get Tim back again here. So let's give him a sec to get back.
Oh,
So we lost you for a
oh,
second, Tim,
seems like
but now you're back. Now you're
hey,
back. Looks good. Tim,
hello, Julia. So
yes,
sorry, it's something wrong. Now, now we're back. Okay.
now we're back. You can hear me, right? You can hear me, you can see me.
I don't know if it was here on my end or.
It looks good, Tim. It looks good. Let's continue, I would
Um,
say.
can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Yeah, yeah. Let me briefly.
So we are getting back as soon as possible. Sorry for that one, but that's part of online events.
Connection now, which I tried. I hope this one better.
Better, better.
Okay, good.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thanks.
Tim,
Sorry, then it was
all
my
good.
end. Apologies.
We just had you break down, right, the three areas, right, where you see
Yeah,
really the biggest potential. And Tim, from here, I would love to pick, one or two success examples that really stand out for you. Um,
yeah.
and
So let me take start with one a bit controversial success example, but Tesla. So I think we all have some opinions also on the charismatic, but also sometimes erratic CEO of Tesla. But I think where we have rightly so to give Tesla massive credit is how dramatically they've impacted the auto industry and accelerating that shift to electric vehicles. You need those people who go and really disrupt companies, because if you think about kind of how Tesla was viewed 5-6 years ago, everybody's like, they're going to go bankrupt or something. And the only way to show an established industry that something is superior is just to make it work. And now everybody is moving. And so the impact of a company like Tesla, one is their direct impact, but the even bigger impact is how they shifted an entire industry to follow their footsteps. And to me, it's probably the biggest example of one particular company on how they really changed an industry, and that I definitely would want to give them credit for. Um,
mhm,
and then, I mean, as always, failures is easy, so I don't want to put too much emphasis, because especially in startups and venture, it's normal. Like, out of 10 things that start, maybe one or two survive, and out of 100, one or two are a success, a real success. So it's normal. People should start and not be yeah, demotivated by failure cases. But to name one, for example, Solyndra is a solar panel manufacturer, and like others, it failed despite significant initial investments, and it really just shows the risk associated with market competition, and also the importance of scalable and cost-effective solutions. So one thing I think we always really tell also our portfolio companies is the idea is one thing, but the idea is really like a very, very little part of
mhm.
starting something. You need to scale it, you need to innovate, you need to drive costs constantly, because if you start something, it's really it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, and it takes 10 years, 20 years, especially in hardware, to build a really excellent companies. And the ones which are success cases and survive, they really relentlessly innovate. um, and there are some which lose it along the way, and those are the failures.
Yeah, I love the example of Tesla, Tim. I think it's very much controversial, but I think they really changed the game. and also how you build companies, how you build an audience. I think it's also like a huge topic. Also, more and more founders, I think, are going out in Europe right now and building that brand to then leverage it for the businesses. But then also the example, right? I think it's especially, I think climate tech is like a long game, right? And you really need to constantly innovate. You need to scale it. You need to stay on top of the game, because otherwise, I think you don't come up with a solution that really stays for the long run. Which and that are the solutions we need. Tim, switching a little bit cheers now from climate tech to venture capital. Also, really, because I really want to deep dive into your experience with the World Fund here. What, from your personal, perspective, is the role of venture capital to really decarbonize the economy and to really, drive change here?
Yeah, so venture capital plays a really important role. If we look into kind of the journey from an idea, or even less than idea, kind of really early stage research, all the way to the success of a Tesla, a scaled public big company, then if you look at this, there's at the beginning, there's the early research, there's institutes like Fraunhofer, and so on. Also, we have some great institutions like Sprint D, for example, in Germany, who are really in this early phase, and Europe is extremely strong there. So 1/3 of our patents in the world in climate tech are in Europe. Also, if you look at the output of universities, 1/3 of the students. So we have a lot of smart people, especially in this early stage research. Then the things come out of university, and then it starts getting a little bit murky. We need to make sure they get out of university, all the research. And then very often ideas die and we're not entrepreneurial enough, because then there's this gap. And then that's where venture capital comes in. First, I mean, venture capital is also a broad term. There are angel investors, which also are a form of venture capital. It means like early stage risk-taking investment, but in a smart way, also not like debt, like banks, also not grants. So really risk-taking investments. Venture early stage funds play a role, business angels play a role, all the way then to the bigger early stage funds like our World Fund. We invest seed, Series A, Series B, so not the super early stuff, not the idea starting phase, but something has to be there. But we're also not, and that's kind of really the gap also we're having here in Europe, not the phase where things are bankable. Once you've proven that things work. So solar is a good example. You can get bank loans now if you build a big solar plant, or you do a solar rollout, or you build wind farms. And that's great, because we've reached a stage where there's real risk in the technology. It's now just about scaling things. But really, especially in this intermediate phase, you couldn't scale without venture capital. And if you look at any of the big inventions in the world, the internet, mobile, any things of the big life-changing things of the last 20 years, all of that were initially venture capital funded, because those are the people who take risks and who also believe in bigger bets, and try to make those happen.
Exactly. And I think, like, what I really personally wish, that a lot of huge venture capital funds that really put the money where it matters, and don't build another one of another marketplace to just be a little bit better in something, but to really invest it in the bigger solutions. And I think that's where venture capital comes in. Tim, how do you evaluate startups, right? How do you evaluate the potential of a startup to then form the decision to invest or to not invest? What's your process
Yeah.
on that sort of things?
So, I mean, on one thing, I would say we look at all the things every other venture capitalist looks at. Well, is it a great team? Do they have some sort of traction? Is this a big market? And do they have a chance to win in this market with the technology and the idea they're proposing? That's pretty boilerplate. Every VC in the world would probably give you some sort of similar answer. There's one thing where World Fund is clearly different, and it's an additional component which we call CPP, which is climate performance potential, and we try to assess the real impact of the technology or the solution in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we look and say, okay, if this technology would really scale, and would really have a breakthrough with its innovation, capture the whole market potential. So it's a really hypothetical driven way of looking at this. Then what is the ability of this company to achieve in terms of carbon emissions? So a little bit to come back to the Tesla example, if this electric vehicle thing succeeds, like how big is the potential? And then it's really just, okay, in this case, well, we displace all the vehicles in the world with from fossil fuels to electricity powered vehicles, and well, yeah, that's worth doing it. And for us, this is really the test of, is it worth doing something? Is it moving the needle? Or is this the proverbial replacing plastic straws with uh, paper straws? Don't get me wrong, I think this is a fine thing to do, but they won't save us in the climate crisis. And so we're trying with this with this analysis to really see, okay, does it move the needle? Does it matter?
Yeah, I love exactly that, thing that sets you apart from all the other VCs, because I think that's where the magic lies, right? To really have that aspect, that perspective, taking into consideration into the formula, to then form a decision. Tim, what are some of the, again, I'm the person who loves examples here because I think it makes
Yeah.
things tangible. What are some startups you invested in, and what made you to invest in? Also, like, I would maybe you take the formula and kind of apply it on it, but I would love to hear one or two examples.
Yeah, good idea. I'll try this. So, always hard to. We've invested in 13 startups so far across energy, food, and some other areas. It's always hard, It's a bit like, if give me examples of your kids, and then it's like, well, you don't want to pick one because they're all doing fantastic work.
Just wanted to.
So I encourage everyone to go on World Fund VC, look on portfolio, and just click through and see some. But yeah, I'll pick two where I can illustrate the climate performance potential very good. One is Planet A Foods. It's They are replacing cocoa. So they're first of all, they're a technology company, but their first product is replacing cocoa with um, a different cocoa-like thing. And now, when first my co-founder Daria brought this business, I was like, well, wait a minute, what's wrong with cocoa? And it's one of those things where I learned again, like, how little we all know about all the little things where there are CO2 effects. And she explained that it was, well, and I didn't know all that. Cocoa is a bit like palm oil. There's a lot of deforestation. Then there are cocoa trees, and like palm oil, they are then, yeah, harvested, and with child labor and a lot of other problems. Also, that's a separate problem. But to produce cocoa, and the ever increasing cocoa demand for, in particular, Europe and the US. And they have developed a process, and it's been in research at the ETH Zurich for many years. Brilliant founding team, very scientific, and they've produced something where they can use oats and also the leftovers of oats, so spelts and those sorts of things, with a precision fermentation process to make this like cocoa. And it sounds crazy, but now you can actually buy it. You can go to Rewe and buy products. It's under the Choviva brand. That's their brand name now for their chocolate. They signed a big cooperation with Rewe. They've signed with Lindt. They've now signed with. They're really making big strides now in. You can buy the product, and it's amazing. It's crazy how much technology can do. And of course, also, it's economically viable. And it's always important that it's also not just ecologically, but economically viable, because it's a very difficult supply chain, but it also has very clear decarbonization goals. So it's this quote unquote chocolate is 94% less CO2 emissions than regular chocolate, regular cocoa. So it's massive effect. And again, cocoa is after beef one of the worst things to eat, and that's that's one of the things I didn't know. It's like, I think everybody knows by now that beef is a problem and also some other meats and dairy, but cocoa always was super innocent for me. It's not. And that's a great product, because let's face it, most of the chocolate we have is also not, it's not like high-end chocolate, but it's coating, it's things in muesli, those sorts of things, and it's a perfect product, which can probably uh, change 80% of the cocoa we use in the world, and that's perfect, perfect carbon potential, but also perfect potential for economic benefit.
Great example. And I think everyone, can very much, everyone eat chocolate. And I think it's such a, product that we like see every day, right? And I think that we often don't think about, right? The impact it has on, the climate and all those aspects. And Tim, last question from my side. I think you mentioned, right, an idea is, it's great to have an idea, but it's all about, the execution, the long game, the marathon. And how do you, as an investor, make sure that the companies you invest in really develop in a way that they can really make an impact? How do you support them along the way?
Yeah, we like every VC try. First of all, I think it's important that the founding team, they're the bosses. So it's very important. The VCs can just help alongside. They can be sparing partner. Of course, there's the financial part. You need money for growth and for scaling. That's the first thing we provide. And then along the way, it's a lot more about mentorship. It's about advice. It's networking opportunities, industry partners, potential customers. So, for example, we have over 200 LPs, and some of those are big companies. We can open doors through that way, which other people can't. Also, talent acquisition. We see a lot of great people coming along, and we try to match them wherever possible. And yeah, also helping in some of the regulatory and market challenges. Always as an advisory. It's always important. At the end, any investment is only as good as the team we're investing in. But yeah, helping along the way. And it's really a VC investment is almost like a marriage. Like it's for 10 years, 15 years. It's a very, very long horizon. You're building something together. And of course, in an ideal world, and hopefully it works most of the times, we can add quite a bit of value along the way.
Yeah. I also love that you mentioned, right, in the end, the founders and the driver's seat, and it's really about mentoring, really leveraging the network, I think, but also letting the founders, be proactive and then take the first step, I think, to really also make the most out of it. And I would love to open it up now for questions. And I would pick a first question that I received from somebody from the community before the event, which is about, I think we have a bunch of, people in the community who are interested in founding companies in the space, right? And what the person asked me, and I often hear is like, hey, as a VC, right? What do you look for in a climate tech founder? What should they bring with them, right? And Tim, how do you evaluate a founder, right? In that space, what makes a great founder in climate tech for you?
So let's replace founder with team first, because it's very rare that one founder
Very
brings
good.
everything.
Very.
Like we all only have usually one personality, one skill set, and to me, it's very often about having complementary teams. So ideally, having someone who is the scientific brain, the technological brain behind things, and then someone who goes out and sells the stuff. And those are fundamentally different skills, and it's very rare that one person can do both. Sometimes people develop over time, and most people, once a company scales, have to develop their management, also their sales skills, because management is quite often about communication, about sales, and so on. Um, and some people do and some people don't over time, but I think generally I would want a team with different skill sets. And yeah, and then it's really also about those two things. We don't like founders who are just basically purely business. Usually the technology is very shallow, there's not much substance here. At the same time, we also don't want two people who are just want to essentially sit in their lab all day and try new things because they're never going to become a big company. You need those, both of those things, and most of our success cases are really have exactly that profile.
Yeah, and I would maybe summarize what you just said, Tim. And I think a great founder like is very aware of that and really, make sure that they have those people that really complement them on board when they approach, a VC. And I think that what makes, from my perspective, a great founder to really get those people who really complement you on board. And
Yeah.
I could never be the scientific person. Therefore, I think it's really being aware that you need those people and like building a network.
Yeah.
Of those people early on. Um, Another question we have here, and we mentioned the evaluation criteria that makes you special, right? The CPP, climate performance potential, and we have a question here which is about CPP. Sounds like a great factor to evaluate. How do you do this in practice? Maybe you want to give again another example that we can work a little bit with it, because I think it's one of the a really cool thing to
Yeah,
evaluate.
yeah. So I gave the example of Planet A Foods, of the sustainable chocolate, sustainable cocoa a while ago. There we look really at a market where it's easy to see, because there's clearly, okay, we replace that amount of tons of cocoa with something else. I'll give you another one which is a bit harder because it's very indirect. It's another investment of ours called Space Forge. Uh, and what they do is it's in space manufacturing. It's one of those cases again where when the deal was brought to us, it was like, well, wait a minute, where's the climate angle? And then I learned, and that, by the way, I love about my job, is that I learned so much about things I usually have no idea about. It's like, hey, they shoot as part of existing rockets. So they produce rockets. They work with SpaceX. They work with Virgin and others to shoot little manufacturing units into space, who then mainly coat computer chips up there. And if you do this in the environment of space with the vacuum you have there, with the purity you have there, with the zero gravity you can produce computer chips for use in 5G, for use in servers, which consume about 80% less energy, and that's massive. Um, and they basically just produce certain amounts of ways of coatings you cannot produce on Earth, and that's the first application. There are other potential applications. It's a really cool website, by the way. I would look them up. Space Forge. It's really fun. One of the best presented storytelling websites. You can. It's always our role models when we're like, okay, how do you present things? And it's really an indirect thing. Is okay. CPP, if we reduce energy use of 5G across the world, that's massive. That's hundreds of megatons. And so it's above our 100 megaton threshold. And an example for an indirect technology, which can have massive influence. And we need both. At the end, we need those indirect technologies, but we also need the rollout of existing technologies. Take our Sunroof, for example. Sunroof is a company that does solar roofs, integrated solar roofs, so very nicely integrated, replaces the whole shingles and roof thing through a smarter solution. That's very simple, quote unquote, simple deployment of an existing technology. There it's clear. At the end, we need both. We need those breakthrough technologies, but we also need things where we accelerate existing technologies, and the CPP is there for both.
I also love what you just said at the end, right? I think it's not just about always reinventing the wheel, but also like really
Right.
optimizing what is already out there. I think there's a lot of great companies did just that in the end. With another question, which is a very short one, but hardware versus software in climate tech, Tim.
Well, I'm a software person. I started when I got a computer as a teenager, started coding. All my first businesses were software. I still do software. And I do, by the way, I do the software investments at World Fund. So I was not the one who selected, for example, the space company or the food company. We have brilliant people at World Fund, Nadine, for example, for food, or Daria for the manufacturing things, who who are know much more about this. I do the software things, and software plays an important role in everything, but also you cannot solve everything with software. I think that was also my main motivation to start the World Fund, because um, even being a software guy, like, it can only do so much. Maybe 10, I would say 10-20%. Software is part of everything, of course. Even in the things where we tackle buildings, for example, building efficiency, our EcoWorks, Edifion, they're a lot software driven, but the end result is that you need to either plug into hardware or you need to even build certain hardware. Um, but it's a combination of both things. But at a core, you need hardware.
One follow-up question here, Tim. How many percentage go into software and how many into hardware? How many software
We
only?
don't
Let me
we
reframe.
don't have a fixed percentage on this. If I look into our current portfolio, I would say, well, two are pure software, and then there are two or three where software plays an important role, and then there's a bunch of others where software, sure, they're users of software, but software plays very little role.
Yeah, I think climate tech is one of the markets where you really hardware has a
Yeah.
huge leverage.
Yes. Yeah.
Um, cool. Another question here, Tim. Again, looking a little bit into the talent side of things, I will ask two more questions here. Um, when you have, technical scientific founders, how do you support them on really also, covering, we just mentioned how important it is to go out to the market to sell it. How do you support them developing those skills? Or like to cover up on that side of things?
So the main thing is, in that regard, on kind of talent and management development, is really being the role of a coach. And of course, we're not an unbiased coach, because we have, which is, I think, a good thing. We have a vested interest that the company does well. It's more about, okay, what other talents do you need in your team? So very often it's about, okay, what are the missing parts, um, and how do you hire for those missing parts? And make sure that every person really focuses on what he or she is best at. It's it's impossible to try as a VC to do things from the side. So, for example, we couldn't do sales for a founder. But what we could do is we could be like, hey, you need sales. You have a weakness here. If we benchmark you against other companies, let's find this person together who can sell, and will help you assess his sales skills, because most technical founders have a hard time doing this, and vice versa. And that would be a typical thing where we would then jointly help them. But it has to come from within. It's not that basically they can outsource sales to us or something. It always has to be initiated by the founders. We can gently nudge them, and we can help, and we can open new perspectives, and benchmarks, and then we have to do things together.
Yeah, I think what I take away, and I think what everyone should take away from that is like really raising the awareness, right? And also making sure, after, the awareness is there to really get the right people in. And I think that's where, the network can very much help. And the VC
Absolutely.
can very much help. Um, one more question, Tim, which is a more specific one, which is about what you think of the future of new companies that are working on permanent carbon removal. Do you believe that the demand will grow to really, do you believe that, we can really make sure that there's enough, supply for the demand that is out there?
Yeah, so that's the topic of carbon capture and storage, which I touched on earlier. I believe it has an important place in the decarbonization value chain, especially for the hard to decarbonize items, which will always be there. It's also one of those industries where we now have, in some cases, astronomical costs, hundreds of euros, to permanently, and really permanently is the important word, store carbon again. That cost will come down through lots of different companies working on this, and some really making some breakthrough technologies. And yes, there is a place for that. Yes, we need to work on this, but we must not do it at the expense of reducing carbon in the first place, because that's always going to be the cheaper way in 90% of the cases, but for the remaining 10 or 5, or I don't know the exact ones, um, it has a place. If you're interested, we have a nice deep dive on that technology. We deep dive is what we call our technology deep dives, when we look into a particular industry, on our website on worldfund.vc, on exactly that, because when we invest in a market, we're trying to build up our hypothesis on this, and we usually publish it. And as far as I know, the one on carbon capture and storage is also to be found somewhere on our website.
Yes, I will share the links afterwards. And Tim, I think we had 45 minutes of like really diving into your personal definition of really climate tech history, trends, portfolio insights. And I am a person, I love to learn from people, right? I think in the space to really get inspired from. And do you have maybe some, names in climate tech that people who are really interested in and want to learn more can follow along besides your account? But who are people to follow along to learn more about it?
There are lots of brilliant people. Project Drawdown, I think I mentioned, is
Yeah,
great. In Germany, Professor Rahmstorff, Stefan Rahmstorff, for example, is one I follow quite a bit. Then let me. I supply the names, but there are two, but I forgot the names, from the UK, who have a lot of great things on energy. But I'll supply them later.
amazing.
You can include them there. And then there are obviously also lots of great books. Speaking of books, by the way, let me do one last book recommendation for those who don't know it. It's also a book I like to give to people who are not directly always working in climate space, but The Ministry of the Future is a book. We've given, it's a novel. It's actually a unique thing. It's a novel mixed with facts. So it's always alternating a fictitious part with kind of a knowledge part, but in a very nice way. But a very, very compelling story, um, uh, on a scientific novel, but just a few years in the future, on a climate catastrophe, but also some ways on how we solved it. And it's a great read. I would recommend to everyone.
Amazing. I will check it out definitely. I love to read, and I think a lot of us here. And Tim, thank you so much for your time. Thank you everyone for joining in the questions, and just listening and learning. And yeah, maybe Tim, we see each other in another session
Of
end of the
course.
year next year. I'm very excited for it. But thank you everyone, and enjoy your evening.
Thank you.
Bye.
Happy 1st of May, everyone.